Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Covenant Security Solutions Learn at Lunch webinar series. Today we're excited to have Mr. Greg Cullison from Insider Spyder. Oh, I'm so excited to hear the presentation, and I'm going to let you guys know ahead of time. If you have any questions, please feel free to write them down, let Greg know, and he'll get right back in touch with you. Greg, we're going to go ahead and start the presentation. So again, thank you for being here today.
You bet, Margie. Thank you so much. Thanks to the folks at Covenant Security. I'd just like to give a shout out to Covenant. I am from Insider Spyder. We're an insider threat detection software. We are partnered with Covenant and appreciate all the fine things they're doing in training and education. A little bit about myself. I have a background in both the public and private sector, and recently, my previous company, I was doing security vulnerability analysis for a number of different organizations. So you see today we're going to talk about intellectual property and the damage that can occur from insider threats. So here is our agenda today. First, we're going to talk about intellectual property itself. Now, if you're a listener in the national security space or the government space, this, of course, equally applies to any confidential information you have. But for the private sector, there are some special things around intellectual property that I think are important for us to define up front. Then from there, we'll talk about what risks there may be to you if your intellectual property is exposed or stolen. And we'll give a specific focus on the insider threat, and I will explain to you why that is such a potentially damaging case. And happily, there are ways you can protect yourself, so we will be discussing that as well. So now with intellectual property, think of it this way. In the U.S. economy, 70% of our gross domestic product, our GDP, is based on some sort of ideas, some sort of intellectual property, and that's an intangible thing. But it really matters not only economy-wide, but on a micro scale to your particular firm as well, because it's what makes you special, what makes you different from your competitors. And it has economic advantage and provides economic value to you as a firm. So with that in mind, even though this intellectual property may be an intangible thing, you really need to consider it like an investment and treat it as such. So here, getting into the definition specifically, I'll talk about trade secrets and why that's different than other types of intellectual property. There are really four broad categories of IP. Those are copyrights, trademarks, patents, and trade secrets. You'll see those listed there in the first bullet as well as graphically. Now the first three, copyrights, trademarks, and patents, those are protected through specific registration. So for example, you could file your patent with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office if you're in the U.S., and that gives you certain legal protection. Trade secrets are different. It's not, a trade secret is really not something you can register per se. And the law has a three-legged test in the United States for what is considered a trade secret. And these are three attributes that are taken from the Economic Espionage Act. And the first is really that it is a secret. It's not a generally known fact. Second, that it has some value. And third, that it really has been protected in some way. So you think back to the schoolyard, and everybody knows what a secret is, right? So your friend Billy told you he had a crush on Susie, but you needed to keep it a secret. So you understood that this was protected information. If everybody knew it, it wasn't really a secret. It really had no status as such. Had underlying value because if you were to expose that secret, you would embarrass your friend potentially. Now, did you take measures to protect that secret from your friend? If not, it was widely known and potentially he was embarrassed. Now to this third point, this idea of adequate protection, in fact, there's no hard and fast rule about what the law would consider you to have adequately protected your trade secrets. So I'm going to tell you now it's really something that's very specific to you and really specific to your firm. And there are best practices out there which I will go over to help you along the way. So the first, when I've ever conducted security vulnerability analysis for a company, the first step is really was sitting down with the customer and saying, what makes you special? What are your company's crown jewels? What specifically do you want protected? And sometimes we get very surprising answers. You know, these could be a lot of different things. So specific to your firm, think, is this something that's really now just a concept or an idea or a novel business method? Or is it customer lists or some kind of strategy document? The third point is probably the most obvious, which is some sort of formula, a secret formula to Coca-Cola, or some software code. Maybe if you're an IP shop like DuPont, it could be any or all of these. To give you one example, I did an analysis for a Fortune 500 company, and when our team asked the question, they said to us, our customer differentiation is in our pricing strategy. That's how we win government contracts. That's how we beat out the competition. And wouldn't you know it, as we walked around the premises, we saw that pricing strategy tacked up on bulletin boards, not marked proprietary, exposed to any number of joint venture partners, and even exposed to the cleaning staff. That was a contracting crew, and nobody even knew who they were. So that really is the fundamental question up front, to understand what it is that you need to protect. Now let's think about some of the bad things that could happen if your IP is stolen or somehow exposed. There was a report done by the Commission on the Theft of American Intellectual Property in 2013, and they talked about some of the most obvious things, which are loss of revenue, reward, and jobs. So yes, if your IP has stolen and is now in the hands of a competitor in a country where there's not strict IP enforcement and it's being replicated, that's lost revenue to you. As well as, back to my earlier point about innovation in the American economy, think about the things that don't get innovated because some entrepreneur has been burned. And then further downstream, there's a potential loss of jobs that either were lost because of the theft of IP or jobs that never were created in the future. Now, I should point out here that the damage may not only be financial, there's reputational risk as well. And I have 3 examples here: Morgan Stanley, Sony Pictures, Target. I think we're very familiar with some of the cyber breaches they've had. I deliberately picked 3 very different industries. In Morgan Stanley's case, they lost customer records due to an insider theft, 350,000 customer records. So imagine now you have 350,000 upset high net worth individuals, probably will take their money elsewhere. Now imagine they probably know other high net worth individuals. So those are people that will hear about this, certainly. And then imagine another group reading this in the news and deciding not to bank or make investments in Morgan Stanley. Sony Pictures, we know the allegations of hacking, North Korea, and the rest, and some of what was exposed were emails that were actually very unflattering towards some of Sony Pictures' clients. So those are reputational risks there as well. Now for Target, I deliberately chose this particular icon here where it shows that Target is offering free credit monitoring and identity theft protection to the people who were subjected to their cyber breach. And make no mistake, Target did the right thing, but what this points out is that that's only going to be really part of the expense to them. I spoke to an IP lawyer about this recently, and much more is going to come in terms of class action lawsuits, reputational damage, meaning that there are customers who are going to choose to do their retail shopping elsewhere. There's a group called Create.org, a nonprofit organization, actually largely funded by Microsoft, as it turns out. But their reason for being is to advocate in favor of stronger intellectual property protection worldwide. And they have a good framework for really assessing the business impact of your trade secret loss. So it's all here on one slide. We started to talk about these things, identifying the trade secrets being the most important, of course. The next is really to find where the holes are in your organization. And here we say based on potential threat actors, because you really have to understand your position in the marketplace. Are you large or small? Are you very deep niche? Who would want that information? What competitors, what other nation-state actors potentially would want that? And what capabilities do they bring to the table? And together with those 2 points, then you really start to understand what is your threat exposure, what's your threat geography. Now, interesting, what Create then says is rank your trade secrets according to their relative value, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it. If you've got a limited security budget, you know you can't cover all the things all the time, so you really have to understand what's the most important to you. What are really the economic value drivers within your company? And then the next thing you need to do is really do an analysis of the economic impact of potential losses. Now, coming to the fore, very recently are things like cyber insurance. Might be something to consider. It's certainly a new and emerging sector in insurance. Some companies choose to protect themselves that way as well, just in case. Last bullet, of course, is securing a trade secret portfolio. We'll talk about some of the best practices there. But what I'd like to highlight here is really specifically the insider threat problem. And this is where my company currently now lives. And when we say insider, we really primarily talk about somebody who is supposed to be there, somebody who's supposed to be on the corporate campus. They're in the normal course of doing their business, and so they don't stick out as a potential threat. Now, to that, we can also add the outside insider, meaning that you have an advanced cyber hacker who is able to hijack legitimate user credentials. So the system thinks that this masquerader is a real person. It's Joe the engineer. He's got the right login credentials. But what they're doing inside your network is completely anomalous and very detrimental potentially to the state of well-being for your organization. So this particular quote is from a study, or a paper rather, that PricewaterhouseCoopers did in 2013. It was the U.S. State of Cybercrime Survey. And the emphasis is mine here, but they identified current and former employees as one of the greatest cybersecurity threats they faced. Now, this has morphed a little bit into discussing specific cybersecurity, but consider that information that you hold, if it's not now digital, it probably will become digital at some point. So information in electronic form lives on networks. The bad guys know this, and that's where they're going to come looking for your information. But even if you have all the best practices in place, there's still a risk to your organization. So as I mentioned, the reason is because insiders are supposed to be there. They're just badging in. They've got the login. They come to work. But what's in their heads? That's really the question. What is it they're actually doing on your corporate network? What makes them additionally dangerous is they know where the most valuable information is. So if there's some reason that they want to get at it, it becomes strikingly easy for them to do so. An outsider who comes in is not necessarily going to know the topology of your network, the file structures. They don't know where all the bodies are buried, so to speak. So they're going to spend potentially considerable time rooting around your network looking for things to steal. So this is to answer a question I get a lot, which is, what's that profile for the insider threat? What are those biometric indicators that let me know if somebody's an insider threat? Well, unfortunately, there is not one profile, but you have to consider what causes somebody to become an insider. There's some negative relationship between the employee and the organization. So in many cases, they're feeling disgruntled. They may have some innate greed, or there may be some other financial issues. So that's all about money, but there could be some external factor. There's some gambling debts. There's a bankruptcy, something like that would cause them to tip into becoming a rogue actor, and they have some desire to either save themselves or to take revenge on the organization. Now, what we've seen in a lot of insider threat cases is the tipping point doesn't necessarily occur right away. It's really an erosion in that relationship between the employee and the organization. So that erosion may occur over time. They realize, hey, I know information I can monetize, and then they decide to take action. And their taking action could be all at once, or it could be over a period of time. So Carnegie Mellon University has done significant studies in this area, and one of their research papers dealt specifically with fraud. So that's a specific type of insider threat case, not necessarily about stealing intellectual property per se. But what is interesting is that they noticed that the average amount of time that elapsed between somebody being hired and actually committing the bad act was about 5 years. Problem being that employers fell into this trust trap. Hey, Joe, the engineer's been here 5 years. He's been a loyal employee. He comes to work every day, does this job. He couldn't possibly be an insider threat. Now, an interesting sidelight is that if people are going to do what I call running and gunning, that's stealing a lot of information and then deciding to quit or announcing they're going to quit, this usually happens within the last 30 days. So if they're planning to leave, that is really the danger period, is the last month prior to them leaving your organization's employ. Now think about most cases, the industry standard is people give their 2 weeks notice, right? So imagine now you've got an employee, 30 days out, they start stealing, they steal for 2 weeks, then they announce that they're going to leave, and then they're quiet for the last 2 weeks because they assume that since everybody knows that they are not there for the long haul, that they're going to be monitored potentially by the organization, so they go quiet. So there may have been all this theft occurring before they even announce their plans to leave. So that is something to be aware of. When you think about your organization and mitigating the insider threat, what I'd like you to do is really widen the aperture. Many organizations will say, that's a security problem, or it's cyber, so that's the IT's problem, or this is the chief risk officer's problem. I would submit to you that it's everyone's problem, and that goes down to the employees. You really need to make the employees understand that they have a role in protecting the well-being of their company. One particular aspect of this is HR. I'll get into this in a couple points, but HR knows who the potentially disgruntled employees are, who the bad actors are, who's having problems, who didn't get promoted, and so forth. So I would say that if you're creating a broad-based insider threat program, you need to consider as well some of these non-technical aspects, like HR. Policies and procedures are a big thing. They are needed, of course, but this can't be something that is just a one-off. So that needs to be understood, but there needs to be enforcement as well. So that means that people need to be held accountable, and that includes managers. And managers need to walk the walk as well as talking the talk. Because if there's a lax security culture in the organization, the line employees are not going to believe it. There's not going to be credibility, and they're just going to consider the policies to be worthless pieces of paper. And this is not only your own employees, but this extends to third parties as well. Consider that Target was taken out by lax security practices at an HVAC contractor. So you need to ensure that any third parties to whom you're exposing confidential information are taking the same due care with your information as you would yourself. Now let's start looking at some main points to consider when you have to protect your IP. The first is the clean desk policy. So if you've got confidential information in physical form, probably not a good idea to leave that out overnight where, like I mentioned with this Fortune 500 company, the char force can come in and see it. So these things need to be kept out of sight from prying eyes. right there. Keeping it out of public view is very important as well. Now, there may be information that you keep on hard drives or other electronic media. You need to consider that data at rest should be encrypted and kept in secure storage. So you may have some, let's say, confidential engineering plans. You may not want that touching the network that also touches the outside world. You know, that might be a standalone system. And consider that that needs to be securely protected as well. The need-to-know policy is something that certainly is talked a lot about in government circles. I don't see that as much in the private sector. I think that is a true failing. Everybody doesn't need to know everything. You consider confidential information, whatever form your IP takes. Does everybody need to know that? Can you limit the attack surface by limiting the number of people who really need to know the information to do their job? Or is it just nice to know for somebody else? Restricted covenants are really the umbrella term of art for things like non-disclosure agreements we've all seen, et cetera, et cetera. Really need to ensure that those are in place with your employees and third parties, as well as if you have employees that are leaving, I would recommend that you remind them that they have signed an NDA, and that's good for the period of the NDA. Again, here's where HR can play a good part. Exit interview, not only finding out why they're disgruntled potentially and leaving, but reminding them that they can't just take your intellectual property and go to a competitor. And you may even want to mail them a copy to their house and let them know that they're being watched. Now, the information security controls are probably where people do the best job with data leakage protection and SIM tools and firewalls and virus checkers. I'm sure you've got all that on your internal system, but ensure that you're really leveraging those to the maximum extent possible, like really getting the information you need out of those, or those just put in and left to run on their own. Physical security controls are as important as well. Badging and locking the doors of the secured lab and so forth. I'll tell you another quick story. A customer told us, well, the managers have the confidential information in their offices, and we use only the highest standard lock set. And we said, okay, what's that lock set? And then we came to inform them that that was a lock set that was 2 generations old, and we showed them a YouTube video on how to defeat that particular lock set. An interesting other idea is that if you've got, let's say, an R&D lab or something where there's a preponderance of protected intellectual property, maybe you don't want to announce the location of that facility. Maybe there should be no signage there. This drives the marketing people crazy, but is there really a reason that the public needs to know that, and potentially the bad guys, that you have something at that location? Awareness, training, and reminders are very important. Again, it's everybody's role, it's everybody's responsibility. Everybody must be part of the solution, and this cannot be just upon hire date and put in their file and forget about it. This needs to be done on a regular basis, whether it's annual training as well as posters, quarterly refreshers. You need to figure out what makes the most sense for your company. But people get lazy. New employees come on, employees leave, things shift. So this is something you really need to think strongly about, and really an ounce of prevention here equals a pound of cure. Do you have a reporting mechanism in place? If someone sees something that looks a little bit weird, do they know that they can approach the security department about that? I think you don't want the security department to be folks that come in and give them their badges, or only deal with them if they've lost a laptop, and that's the end of the story. If you can engage the security function much more day-to-day, and people understand that even if they see something they don't quite understand, if they report that, that's something that will be taken seriously. Even if it's something small, you know, many data points can start to point you towards some patterns. An employee may say, you know, I worked late last night, and I saw that the cleaning crew held open the back door with the garbage can, and then I saw a couple people come in and out, and they didn't look like they were part of the cleaning crew. I don't know what that's about, just seemed kind of weird. So you start to collect observations like this, and you may have indicators of a potential problem. So the NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology at Department of Commerce, came up with a cyber framework. And if you don't have a cyber framework, or if it's something you want to look at vis-a-vis your own, I think this is a very good baseline, these 5 general areas for you to really understand how protected you are in the cyberspace. Where Insider Spyder lives is really as a detection tool. We do continuous monitoring. We're at the network level, and we do something called user behavior analytics. So we really look at what's normal, and using some cool math and stats, we're able to measure what's abnormal and give indicators in the form of threat scores to your security department, so your security analysts can follow up and say, you know, the system indicates that there's some odd activity by this user. You can investigate further, see exactly what they're doing. Were they supposed to be dealing with those files? Were they supposed to be working at that time? And that allows you to more robustly understand what's actually happening inside your network. How are people actually interacting with the information? Here's a little homework for you. I mentioned Carnegie Mellon. Here's their common sense guide to mitigating insider threats. There's a copy at NCIX, which is the National Counterintelligence Executive. And the second one there's actually, this is being taken seriously enough that the Executive Office of the President actually has a strategy on mitigating the theft of U.S. trade secrets. They realize that this erosion of economic value is potentially detrimental to the economy, and so there's a strategy for mitigation there as well. You can certainly Google the NIST framework. It's right there in PDF format, and that's something you may like to look at as well. So, Margie, that concludes my prepared remarks, and I will turn the floor over to you.
All I can say is wow. Wow, I've really learned a lot of good information here. I really appreciate you enlightening us in regards to the insider threat mitigation process. And I love learning about intellectual property. It's hard for us out here to understand what's the difference between a trade secret, yada, yada, yada. But this presentation really helped me quite a bit. And I just want to applaud you and thank you for sharing this information with us today.
Thank you so much, Marge. I love talking about it. I could talk about it all day. And 25 minutes hardly does it justice. We've scratched the surface, but hopefully I've provided some ideas.
But you've really brought to our attention that it's important for organizations to have policy in order for us to really, we always say if you see something, say something. But how do you understand how to say something if the organization doesn't have a process in place? I mean, we just don't usually think of things like that, and I really appreciate you, triggering that for our folks out here in the audience.
Well, my pleasure.
So I really have one question myself that I should consider in the business world, and that's how this responsibility extends out to third parties out here. We fail to realize that we partner with different organizations. We have people coming in and out of our organization every day. Can you take a minute to just discuss that a little further for us?
Sure. I think that you have to be careful about making a false distinction between somebody who's an employee and somebody who's a contractor or a subcontractor, because very, very likely they have the same access to your facilities and the same access to your information. So I would say at a minimum, organization to organization, you need to make sure that they have signed legal documents like restricted covenants that put them on the hook to use the same best practices that you do, and spell out very specifically, have them spell out as well how specifically they are going to protect your information.
That's sort of where the NDA comes into place. At what point in a relationship should organizations actually sign NDAs? At the beginning? I mean, I'm kind of scared right at the beginning because I'm like, oh my God, it made me feel like I shouldn't trust you. But I mean, are NDAs basically to be that foundation of a certain level of trust between partners?
I think so. I think that they're so widely used that it's understood even early on that if you're going to share confidential information, people will find you to be more professional if you do that. So I think it is important early on. But it shouldn't be something that just kind of signatures are scribbled on and thrown away. I mean, they need to understand that you're taking it seriously and make sure they have the adequate protections in place.
Well, again, Greg, I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge and your time with us. Anyone out here in the audience, if you have any questions, feel free to contact Greg directly, or you can forward your questions to me at iatraining@covenantsecuritysolutions.com. Greg, again, thank you so much for sharing your information, and I look forward to us maybe having a continuing part 2 to this presentation. Let's check out the interest out there in the audience. And again, thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Margie. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.